though it is gold standard technique for though it is gold standard, it is cost effective and reproducible. Its labor intensive nature has not make him that it is not in routine use. So the test which is in routine use and widely used is pre-treatment of sera with polyethylene glycol, because it is simple to perform, inexpensive and very precise and reproducible. It has certain disadvantages, like along with precipitation of macroprolactin, it do precipitate some monomeric form of prolactin, so resulting into falsely low value of prolactin. For this, to use macroprolactin, polyethylene glycol method, we should have reference ranges so that we can use it routinely. There is another method for macroprolactin detection, which is specific immunoglobulin G depleting reagents. This is also effective method, but it may not remove all non-IgG containing form of prolactin, macroprolactin, and still we can be having interference with macroprolactinemia. So this is just a simple algorithm to tell you about hyperprolactinemia. Whenever there is value in between 0 to 20, we need not do anything because it is normal value. When we get value of 21 to 199, then we have to reassess the sample with pooled sample testing or with dilution whenever necessary, and then jump for the imaging technique. If it is more than 200, then macroprolactinoma is more likely the possibility. So as Dr. Fadke has given input that while interpreting hyperprolactinemia, we should not forget about physiological factors, drug history and analytical interferences. So now, do you consider possibility of this macroprolactin while interpreting hyperprolactinemia?
Certainly we do, especially again many tests are done as routine tests, so called. So person who has otherwise no symptoms comes with a report of FSH, LH and prolactin, and if the periods are normal, if the fertility is normal, there are no other signs, a high prolactin does not require any treatment, whether it is 500, 1000 or 10,000, it doesn't matter. If asymptomatic, if you have demonstrated obviously that there is no tumor, you forget about that patient and don't monitor at all. And we have several such patients who have no disease whatsoever, so they are not to be treated.
Yes.
So certainly this possibility is always considered.
So the key points to remember as far as prolactin assay is concerned, that whenever there is hyperprolactinemia, we should always do repeat testing on pooled sample followed by screening for macroprolactin prior to jumping on imaging techniques.
I would just like to add one small point here about this pituitary, which you so rightly crossed, because the typical reaction often is that when you get a high prolactin, they are sent for pituitary imaging. And the problem with pituitary imaging is that up to 20% of normal women will have some microadenomas detected on pituitary. So you are in a big fix that you have first demonstrated a high prolactin and now you say, okay, this is the tumor. So they all do all kinds of things, run around to neurosurgeons and whatnot and so on. But normal people can have microadenomas in their pituitary. So we have to be very careful before we talk of imaging at all.
Yeah.
So as you rightly pointed out and you crossed it out, pituitary imaging is only when you have really proved that there is a significant prolactin elevation which is to be treated, and now you want to know if there is a tumor big enough to cause attention.
Dr. Ingrev, what is your input if infertile patient comes to you with hyperprolactinemia?
See,
how do you go about
infertile patient is not asymptomatic. Clearly she has a problem, so she needs treatment.
Okay.
Now, often treatment is overdone because, I mean, there is a big belief that even borderline, I mean, Dr. Ingve might disagree with me, but if you look at randomized trials on treatment with prolactin, borderline high prolactin doesn't cause infertility. I mean, it's not proven at all. But I can see the justice in giving them a tablet to try and reduce the prolactin if nothing else is found to be abnormal. So that's okay. So in an infertile patient, I would not, really stand on it and say I will never give this or that. But in routine patients who don't have any disease and they are just doing a prolactin, they clearly have to be told to go away.
Dr. Inge,
How things stand.
how many times do you advise TSH or thyroid panel for this patient of hyperprolactinemia?
100% of times. As I said, one of the most important causes is hypothyroidism. So unless you have ruled that out, you can't really interpret prolactin elevations.
Yes.
That's how it is. So very often we see a person who has gone to someone for irregular periods. Battery of tests is done. In that, the patient has hypothyroidism. The prolactin is high, so they get thyroid medicines, they get cabergoline and all kinds of things. It's a big mess. Their lipids are high, so they get a statin as well. Their vitamin D is always low, so they get vitamin D, then B12, then some metformin. So what would have been done with a simple tablet of thyroxine, they end up with about 10 different medicines and 10 different tests. So always thyroid must before we interpret prolactin.
So let us come to next point, that is ovarian reserve test. So ovarian reserve tests are mainly done to assess ovarian response prior to IVF. These are the various platforms available for ovarian reserve test, but biochemical and biophysical tests are more commonly done. In biochemical testing, FSH, FSH-LH ratio, inhibin B and basal estradiol levels are the important one, while with introduction of transvaginal sonography, AFC count has become now gold standard for as a measure of ovarian reserve. So I'd like to have input of Dr. Ingray about her protocol for ovarian reserve testing.
First of all, I would say that the literature says that the AMH, anti-Mullerian hormone, would predict the quality of oocyte. If the value is above 4, that would predict the risk of hyperstimulation. But the value which is below 2 and the antral follicular count is lesser than 3 on either side, that would predict the genetic quality of that oocyte and would guide me to counsel the patient regarding usage of her own oocytes, which might give a failure, and a suggestion of a donor oocyte cycle. So that would be my interpretation of the AMH value, which would fall below 1, and the antral follicle count is like 3 or 2-1 on either side, because the AMH would guide me that the genetic quality of this oocyte is not going to be good, so probably it will not fertilize even after doing XC, and probably it will not divide up to blastocyst phase. So that would be the inference I would take out from AMH value if antral follicular count is on the lesser side. If antral follicular count is normal, then I would like to see the AMH value only to predict if she is going to be in a high risk zone. So I wouldn't, frankly speaking, I'm not doing the AMH values for the patients who are having a normal ovarian reserve to predict the ovarian reserve. But if ovarian capacity is more than 10-15 primordials on either side, then to have a documentation of the AMH value, whether there would be the increased risk for the OHSs. So that would complete my examination panel. More often we do this to, embark the report of lesser antral follicle count and to say it very strongly that this oocyte quality is going to be affected. Let us prove it also with the AMH prediction. So that value lesser than 2 is going to be standing by my sonography report. And what we are seeing, definitely the patients are insisting upon doing their own oocyte cycles, and we see that outcome in the laboratory, that the oocyte quality, what we see, the fertilization after fertilizing those 4 or 5 oocytes, and the fragmentations I'm seeing in the embryos, almost more than say 10% cycles of this type of patients, we have got nothing to transfer back to the uterus.